Thank you all the press. Those who have watched how Hong Kongers had organized themselves with grace and fluidity at yesterday's demonstration would agree that the people have once again debunked the police's groundless presumption that demonstrations pose threats to public safety. Conversely, in many of the recent cases, it has been the way that the police handled the demonstrations that is responsible for most of the resulting chaos. Their unreasonable insistence that all attendees must assemble in and stay within Victoria Park for this rally had caused more confusion and physical discomfort amongst the participants on the day that there would otherwise have been. Even so, as the mass demonstration happened yesterday with only 3 public relations personnel from the police force on site, the Hong Kong police seem to have failed their constitutional job as the facilitators of public events. They owe the people of Hong Kong an explanation for their absence throughout the rally at their upcoming press conference indeed. Perhaps they should also clarify whether the presumed misjudgment of how the demonstration would proceed and their reluctance to facilitate it better, if at all, were a form of political oppression. We once believed that the civil rights and liberties were protected by the Basic Law. We once thought that having one's voice silenced or the rights to assemble or demonstrate denied were just occurrences north of the border. But the fact today is that 22 years on since the hangover, we have not only been unable to actualize true democracy, those rights and freedom promised to us are also being snatched away one after another. Many might say that the Hong Kong society might not be fully democratic, but it is at the very least free. But in reality, our society is falling back and turning into one that resembles the mainland. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights protects these very rights of individuals from being undermined by authorities, institutions, and organizations. It also ensures equality between individuals so that they may live without political oppression or discrimination. These principles are implemented in Article 27 of the Basic Law and Article 17 of the Hong Kong Bill of Rights. Civil liberties such as the freedom of demonstration, assembly, association, and procession are thus guaranteed. And yet, according to the statistics presented by the Civil Human Rights Front at their press conference earlier last week, the proportion of applications being rejected has grown from 0.01% to close to 30% since the onset of the anti-extradition movement, often for reasons that these demonstrations might pose public security threats. However, the international human rights law clearly states that the concern for potential violence is not a valid reason to deny one's right to demonstrate. The UN Human Rights Committee also iterates in its report published in November 2018 that demonstrators should not be demanded to secure a formal permission as a prerequisite or to promise to keep order, for these are considered excessive restrictions on the freedom to rally. The European Court of Human Rights have also exemplified with the court case between Lashmankin and the Russian government in 2017 that the police are not in a position to demand the demonstrators into changing their planned location or route. The authorities manipulate the law to suppress the freedom of expression for a reason. It is against the Public Order Ordinance that a demonstration proceeds despite the notice of objection, and the police are licensed by the same ordinance to terminate and disassemble any unauthorized demonstrations with coercion. One may have seen in multiple news footages protesters under arrest begging for the police to stop hitting them and apologizing for nothing but to stop the bodily torture. Still, the police officers on the front line, consumed by subjective hatred and fury, attack the arrest hysterically by rubbing their faces against the tarmac and kicking them in the head. The police also abuse these individuals during the detention period to make them confess to crimes that they did not commit and to obtain more personal information over which they have the right of privacy. Some have also been prevented from meeting their lawyers and next to kin. The police have even transferred individuals to distant police stations and detention centers on the Chinese border after the arrest, without informing the families and lawyers of their whereabouts. These acts are not just serious violation of local and international protocols. They are also considered torture under the Bill of Rights. The Hong Kong government has so far deliberately architected circumstances in which normal proceedings of a demonstration may easily become unlawful, so that the police are given the excuses to use violence on protesters. They have also sanctioned the brutal mistreatment of those under arrest as a means to avert people from protesting. There is no end as to how far the government would go in crushing the basic human rights of its people, making it no different to any of those totalitarian regimes in history. What has been achieved yesterday is therefore particularly remarkable, despite the legal risk of disobeying the notice of objection for yesterday's mass demonstration. More than 1.7 million determined Hong Kongers braved the white terror and stood out in the rain, upholding the 5 demands just the same. The thoroughly peaceful and orderly demonstration has been a most elegant exemplar of the civil quality and wisdom of the people in Hong Kong who have lived up to and executed the philosophy to be water beautifully, and who utterly deserve to live free without fear thereafter. We should not have had to earn this, but we deliver Chief Executive Carrie Lam's request to cease all force from our end anyhow. This is us listening to the call both within ourselves and the government. It should now be the government's turn to listen once and for all and deliver our request at last. And we invite the international community to synchronize closely.
If I can repeat what I just said, summarize what I just said in English, the basic principle is that the police must have reasonable suspicion if they are to exercise their power to stop and search any ordinary citizen, and their reasonable suspicion must be based on objective facts capable of being proved reasonable, and they can't just, especially the frontline officers, cannot just rely on so-called intelligence in relation to the kinds of people who may be present in any particular place, because they have to form a reasonable suspicion on their own, on the basis of their own observation, either of the persons concerned, the persons being searched, and the actual circumstances prevailing in the place. And that would perhaps summarize what I just said in Chinese. And to recap that in English, basically, the police can only enter private premises if they have a court warrant, or they have the consent of the householder herself, and that is the basic position under the common law as well as the constitutional in the constitutional context of Hong Kong. But the police force ordinance carves out a very specific exception, and that exception is to allow and to authorize police officers when they're in a situation of fresh or hot pursuit to enter a private to enter a private place, a privately owned place, without either the consent of the owner or without a court warrant. But that is a very narrow exception in the light of the constitutional rights of freedom from interference with one's property. And similarly to the position with respect to the reasonable suspicion which I just mentioned, it is not a reasonable reason to enter a private premises for the purposes of arresting someone whose arrest would in law be justified. Merely to say that a crime or a criminal offense occurred in the vicinity of the private premises concerned would not be a good enough reason to for the police officer to enter, but that has exactly been what the police officers in Hong Kong have been asserting to be their right, and that is wrong, and I hope they can really look up the law and make lawful decisions. Thank you.
Hi, ABC Australia. My question's for Brian. Brian, your movement has shown that it is peaceful and that it has massive public support. But it has also shown that you can be radical, very disruptive. Okay, great. I'll just repeat. So it's from ABC Australia. Brian, your movement has shown that it is peaceful and that it has massive public support, but also that you can be radical, very disruptive and even violent at times. Neither of these approaches have gained you the 5 demands that you are asking for so far. So going forward, which path will you choose?
Thank you for your question. And if I understand correctly, I also hear that you agree on a lot of the protests happened in Hong Kong currently has been peaceful.
Yes, and I'm saying that there's 2 different paths here. We've seen both sides. I have while I've been here. And which path will you choose going forward, seeing as neither approach has been successful so far? Thank you.
If you ask me personally, I would listen to what the majority of Hong Kong would want to proceed. We have started all demonstration rallies or assemblies very peacefully, but after 2.5 months, it seems that the Hong Kong government has not responded to our 5 demands. So one thing leads to another, and it became, if you may call it, escalations. So if you ask me, I personally would hope that there would be a quick resolution to this from the government so that we don't have to protest anymore. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Victor from Hungary, and I would like to go back to the question raised by my Australian colleague before, because Brian, you mentioned that you were telling us your private opinion, whether you go on the peaceful or whether you go on the violent way. So I'm wondering if if there's any official statement by the citizens, or is there any brainstorming on it, or so what's going on behind the scenes, if you are thinking about which way to go and how actually it works? So thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. The citizens' press conference merely serve as a public platform, an open platform. None of us would be the main or the person behind any of those arrangements or organizations. We have speakers from different fields to express our opinion. These are all collectively from the people of Hong Kong. So, to answer your question, I am in no way, nor it's our press conference, serve as the main or official channel to respond such claims or planning. Thank you.
And to give some additional information, and thank you for Victor's question. And concerning any official statement or any official platform to announce such statement, and as Brian said, we are not any official organization, or we are not the organizer behind of such movement. However, we can see that it is obviously a common unity that Hong Kong protesters are fighting for our 5 great demands, and the 1.7 million of people who who go to Victoria Park yesterday, and we can see that any polarization or any white terror can stop us from fighting our 5 demands. And no matter we fight in a peaceful or in a more violent way, and this is just a different form of our protest, different form of our movement, and to whether to choose which path or which way to continue our movement, and I think it leaves for public discussion, and the decision have to be made up by our all fellow citizens.
If I can also contribute to answering this question, far be it from me, of course, to represent any of the protesters that have been demonstrating in whatever means during the last 2 months. And I do not comment on the wisdom of the protesters' actions, but what I can say is that as a matter of international human rights law, it's very important to understand that the use of force by protesters does not necessarily amount to violence or deserve the label of violence. It is very important, according to the jurisprudence of the European Court of Human Rights, which Europeans would be very familiar with, and where violence or force is used for a political motive, it is very important that the national institutions, especially the courts and the police, give due account to the motive, the benign motive of the protesters. And in addition, it is sometimes very important to distinguish between mob-like violence on the part of protesters and violence where it had been the police who started the violence. So there is a principal distinction between the two, and it is not fair nor principled to simply describe protesters as violent and probably describing them as some kind of a mob.
Thank you. My name is Jerome. I work for a newspaper in the Netherlands. Question for Brian. In 2014, one of the reasons the protests fell apart is a lack of unity and strategy in the leadership. Seeing there's no leadership now, that could be an advantage, but how do you prevent the movement from falling apart like in 2014? How do you keep the unity in the way going forward and for the next couple of weeks?
Thank you, Joan, for your question. From the umbrella movement in 2014, it's been a good few years. We believe that despite not having any leadership or any main party organizing this movement right now, the people of Hong Kong have learned and have improved based on the fact and our core values that we treasure a freedom of rights, freedom of speech. These are the fundamental principles of any civil societies should uphold. So, to answer your questions, from what we uphold deep down in our heart, we believe that we will persist. And only if we persist, that the Hong Kong government would listen to us and respond appropriately. Thank you.
And in additional, I think the only thing that keep all protesters together is our fight for justice and our belief in justice. And no matter how government polarizes, how the government threatens us, and we are determined to fight for what belief is correct.
Hi, Emma Clark from AFP. If there's not a quick resolution to your 5 demands, which seems unlikely after 3 months already, will protesters return to the more violent tactics that we've seen already?
Thank you, IFP, for your question. To be very honest, we don't have an answer. We tried different ways and means to fight for our freedom, but yet the Hong Kong government has chosen to silence or neglect or ignore our 5 demands. But we trust that and we believe that the people of Hong Kong will stay fluidly, or as we have a slogan, be water. We will continue, and only if we continue to fight for our 5 demands, we would certainly hope the government would once and for all listen to us as soon as possible and respond and handle this request accordingly.